Remember the golden age of MTV, when the flick of a channel could transport you from your living room to a packed arena, a smoky back alley, or a pyrotechnic-filled soundstage? Their song was the anthem of your summer. Their poster was on your wall. Their t-shirt was a staple of your wardrobe. Here are 15 forgotten one-hit wonders in heavy metal history you need to hear. 1. Trickster. It's 1990. The glam metal party that raged through the 80s is still going strong, but the keg is starting to run dry. Into this world steps Trickster, a quartet of bright-eyed, ridiculously photogenic guys from Paramus, New Jersey. With their debut single, Give It To Me Good, they unleashed a perfect slice of pop metal confection. The song was an explosion of catchy vocal harmonies, a bouncy, unforgettable guitar riff, and a chorus so infectious it felt scientifically engineered to get stuck in your head for weeks. The video was pure catnip for MTV. The band looked like teen idols, performing with an earnest, high-energy charm that was impossible to dislike. For a brief, shining moment, Trickster was the future. Their self-titled debut album went gold, and they were everywhere. They toured with giants like Scorpions and Poison, and their faces were plastered across every rock magazine. They followed up with 2 more successful singles, One in a Million and Surrender, making them one of the most promising new acts on the scene. They were the personification of making it, the dream every kid with a guitar hopes for. So what happened? In a word, Nirvana. Trickster's rise coincided exactly with the seismic shift in the musical landscape. By the time they released their second album, Here M'Diao, in 1992, the world had changed. The upbeat, fun-loving party rock they specialized in was suddenly seen as obsolete, replaced by the angst and grit of the grunge revolution. They were a textbook case of being the right band at the wrong time, or more accurately, the last band to sneak in the door before it was slammed shut for a decade. Interestingly, guitarist Steve Brown became a respected session musician and has even filled in for Phil Collen in Def Leppard, proving the immense talent that was always there. Trickster was the final, brilliant flash of a dying star. But while Trickster was a victim of a changing world, our next band was undone by a tragic accident at the absolute peak of their power, centered around a frontman whose voice was almost superhuman. 2. Steelheart. There are high notes, and then there is the note Miljenko Matijevic hits at the end of I'll Never Let You Go, Angel Eyes. It is a sound of such stratospheric, glass-shattering power that it instantly cemented Steelheart's place in rock history. Released in 1990, this power ballad was the quintessential lighters in the air moment. It was a slow-burning epic of love and loss, propelled by Matijevic's astonishing vocal range. The song and its dramatic music video were inescapable on MTV and radio, climbing all the way to number 23 on the Billboard Hot 100 and becoming a global phenomenon. The band, formed in Connecticut, was more than just a power ballad machine. Their debut album was packed with high-energy hard rock, but it was I'll Never Let You Go that made them stars. They were poised for a massive career, with a frontman who possessed arguably one of the most powerful voices in the entire genre. Their future seemed limitless as they began touring for their second album, Tangled in Rains. Then tragedy struck in a truly bizarre and horrific way. On Halloween night in 1992, while opening for Slaughter in Denver, Matijevic was struck by a massive, improperly secured lighting truss, which fell and hit him in the head. The accident left him with a severe brain injury, memory loss, and a long, grueling road to recovery. The band and its momentum was instantly finished. It's one of the most dramatic and unfortunate what could have been stories in rock. Did you know that after his recovery, Miljenko Matijevic's incredible voice was used to provide the singing vocals for Mark Wahlberg's character in the 2001 film Rockstar? It was a fitting, if bittersweet, return for a voice that was silenced at its zenith. While a falling object cut our last band's career short, our next group was a supergroup whose hit was so massive and so different from their rock pedigree that it ironically guaranteed they could never follow it up. 3. Bad English.
When I see you, baby, and everything's alright.
What do you get when you combine members of Journey and the Babies? You get a supergroup with a pedigree for crafting immaculate rock anthems. Bad English, featuring Journey's Neil Schon and Dean Castronovo, alongside former Babies members John Waite and Ricky Phillips, was built for arenas. Their 1989 self-titled debut was a masterclass in slick, polished AOR, album-oriented rock, and its lead single, the hard-charging Forget Me Not, was a solid rock hit. But it was the second single that would define, and ultimately doom, them. That song was When I See You Smile, a sweeping power ballad penned by the legendary songwriter Diane Warren. It was a commercial juggernaut. John Waite's passionate vocal performance propelled the song to the #1 spot on the Billboard charts. For a moment, Bad English was the biggest band in the country. The video was in constant rotation. The tour was a massive success, and they had achieved the pinnacle of rock stardom. The problem was, the hit was too big, and it wasn't truly representative of the band's harder rocking core. They became known as the When I See You Smile Band, a label that the rock and roll purist members, especially Waite and Schon, reportedly grew to resent. The pressure to replicate that ballad success created immense internal friction. Their second album, Backlash, failed to produce a similar smash hit, and the band imploded under the weight of conflicting egos and musical directions. Interestingly, the band's name, Bad English, supposedly came from a pool player's comment about how the members were using bad English on the cue ball. A quirky origin for a band whose career became a classic lesson in the curse of the monster hit. While our last band's members came from certified rock royalty, our next group featured a drumming legend who assembled a band that looked and sounded the part, but whose hunger for fame was satisfied with only a single bite. 4. King Cobra. In the mid-'80s, if you wanted to form a glam metal band, having a rock and roll legend in your corner was a massive advantage. King Cobra had just that in Carmine Appice, the iconic drummer for Vanilla Fudge, Cactus, and Rod Stewart. In 1984, Appice decided to assemble a band from the ground up that would capitalize on the burgeoning LA metal scene. He recruited 4 unknown but highly photogenic musicians, decked them out in matching blonde hair and flashy outfits, and created a band that was tailor-made for MTV. Their anthem was Hunger, a track from their 1985 debut, Ready to Strike. The song was a powerful mid-tempo rocker with a soaring chorus and a slick, memorable music video featuring the band in a post-apocalyptic cage match. It had all the right ingredients for the era: a tough but melodic sound, a striking visual identity, and the credibility of a rock legend behind the kit. The song got decent airplay, and the band landed impressive touring slots, building a respectable following. However, the band felt more like a calculated project than a gang of rock and roll brothers, and the lineup proved to be unstable. Vocalist Mark Free, who would later transition and become Marcy Free, left after the second album, and the band lost its momentum. They were a perfect snapshot of the era's aesthetic, but they lacked the single, monster hit needed to elevate them to the top tier. Fascinatingly, King Cobra served as a launching pad for its members. Original guitarist Jake E. Lee was approached to join, but declined, later finding fame with Ozzy Osbourne. The band itself became a revolving door of talent, but it never again captured the brief, hungry magic of its first big strike. Our next band also had connections to rock royalty, but their biggest hit was a bluesy, stomping anthem that felt more like a southern barroom brawl than a Hollywood stage show diss. 5. Tora. Tora brought a welcome dose of southern grit and bluesy swagger to the late 80s hard rock scene. While many of their peers were singing about girls and parties, Tora's sound was rooted in something more authentic and raw. Their breakout hit, Walkin' Shoes, from their 1989 debut, Surprise Attack, was the perfect embodiment of this. It wasn't a speed metal shred fest or a syrupy power ballad. It was a greasy, mid-tempo stomp powered by a slide guitar riff and the soulful, raspy vocals of Anthony Corder. The song was a breath of fresh air on rock radio and MTV. It had attitude, it had groove, and it felt real. The album sold well, eventually going gold, and Torah was lauded as one of the most promising new bands, a group that could bridge the gap between classic rock influences and modern hard rock. They had a unique sound that set them apart from the pack and were poised to build a long and successful career. What went wrong? After a successful tour, they recorded their second album, Wild America, which was a fantastic record, but unfortunately fell victim to both label issues and the changing musical climate of the early 90s. Then they recorded a third album that their label, A&M Records, refused to release, leaving the band in limbo before eventually dropping them. It was a classic case of a talented band being cut down by industry politics and a shifting cultural tide. Did you know that the unreleased third album, titled Revolution Day, became a legendary lost album for fans? It was finally released officially over a decade later, proving to the world that Torah had much more to offer than just one great song. While that band's bluesy authenticity set them apart, our next entry was a Canadian act that crafted a simple, powerful, and ridiculously catchy anthem that became a definitive statement of rock and roll purpose. 6. Helix. It was a question with an obvious answer, a call and response so simple and effective it was destined to become a stadium-chanting classic. For the Canadian hard rock veterans, Helix, their 1984 anthem Rock You was the culmination of nearly a decade of hard work. The song from their album Walkin' the Razor's Edge was a pure, unadulterated blast of fist-pumping energy. It wasn't complex, it wasn't profound, but its driving riff and irresistible chorus were the perfect distillation of the rock and roll spirit. The music video became an MTV staple, and the song propelled Helix to their highest level of international success. They were already heroes in their native Canada, but Rock You put them on the map across the United States and Europe. The album became their most successful release, and for that moment, they were living the rock and roll dream they were singing about. However, they were never able to replicate that level of success outside of Canada. Subsequent albums had strong material, but failed to produce a song with the same universal crossover appeal as Rock You. They were perhaps a bit too straightforward and traditional compared to the glam explosion happening in LA. Remarkably, their signature anthem almost didn't happen. Executives at their record label initially rejected the song, considering it too simple and stupid. The band insisted, and it went on to become the song that would define their entire career, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas are the most powerful. Helix continues to tour and record to this day, a testament to their unwavering dedication to the rock and roll cause they so famously spelled out. Our next group also had a singular, powerful anthem, but they hailed from the UK, and their hit was a dark, menacing warning that became a cult classic for a more hardcore sect of metal fans. 7. Grim Reaper. From the heart of the new wave of British heavy metal came Grim Reaper, a band whose sound was as subtle as their name. Led by the powerhouse vocals of the inimitable Steve Grimmett, their mission was to play loud, fast, and unapologetic heavy metal. Their signature song, See You in Hell, from their 1983 debut of the same name, was a perfect mission statement. It was a mid-tempo stalker of a track, built on a simple but menacing riff and Grimmett's soaring air raid siren of a voice. The song's music video is a legendary piece of low-budget 80s gold, featuring the band performing in a village church, intercut with cheesy but charming medieval fantasy scenes. It received significant play on early metal shows and helped the band gain a foothold in America. Steve Grimmett, with his incredible pipes and commanding presence, was a world-class frontman. The band had the power and the authenticity that many of their more polished, glam-oriented peers lacked. Despite releasing 2 more solid albums, they never broke through to the mainstream. Their sound was perhaps too raw and traditionally metal for the pop-oriented direction the scene was taking. They were a band out of time, a gritty NWO BHM act trying to compete in the glossy world of LA glam. Label disputes eventually led to their breakup, and the members went their separate ways. Fascinatingly, Steve Grimmett was once a candidate to replace Rob Halford in Judas Priest, a testament to how highly regarded his vocal talents were among his peers. Though they remained a cult act, See You in Hell endures as a beloved, defiant anthem of the metal underground. While Grim Reaper was a bastion of traditional metal, our next band was an exercise in pure, unadulterated absurdity and excess, known for a song that was less a hit and more a viral spectacle of technical insanity. 8. Nitro. What happens when you take a guitarist who plays a custom-built four-necked guitar and pair him with a vocalist who can shatter glass with his impossibly high-pitched screams? You get Nitro. And what happens when that duo decides to create the fastest, most over-the-top heavy metal song imaginable? You get Freight Train. Nitro was the brainchild of guitarist Michael Angelo Batio and vocalist Jim Gillette, two musicians whose technical abilities bordered on the realm of comic book fantasy. Their 1989 debut album, OFR Out Fucking Rageous, was a monument to instrumental excess. Freight Train was their signature statement. The song itself is a blur of speed metal riffing, but it was the music video that became the stuff of legend. It features Batio playing his insane quad guitar, shredding with both hands simultaneously, and Gillette wailing in a register that seemed to defy human anatomy, at one point holding a single, piercing scream for over 30 seconds. It wasn't a hit in the traditional sense. It was too bizarre and extreme for radio. Instead, it was a spectacle, a you-have-to-see-this-to-believe-it phenomenon on MTV's Headbangers Ball. Nitro was pure shock value. The band's image and sound were so extreme that they were impossible to take entirely seriously, and their hyper-technical style had a very limited audience. After a second album with a different lineup, the project dissolved. They were a flash in the pan, but the pan was filled with gasoline and fireworks. Did you know that before Nitro, Jim Gillette released a solo album called Proud to Be Loud, which featured a young guitarist named Paul Gilbert, who would go on to form Mr. Big? And Michael Angelo Batio became a legendary figure in the world of guitar instruction, his speed instructional videos becoming iconic for aspiring shredders everywhere. Nitro was less a band and more a blistering, unforgettable dare. From a band that was all about shocking excess, we moved to one that was the epitome of radio-friendly polish, a supergroup that delivered a perfect, synth-driven anthem for the ages. Fastway 10. Halloween. In the mid-1980s, a new sound was brewing in Germany, a fusion of the speed of thrash metal with the melodic, soaring vocals and twin guitar harmonies. This was power metal, and its chief architects were Halloween. While they were already legends in the metal underground, it was one song from their monumental 1988 album, Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 2, that briefly launched them into the international mainstream, I Want Out. With its instantly recognizable opening guitar riff and an unforgettable, defiant chorus, I Want Out was a perfect metal anthem. It was fast, powerful, and incredibly catchy. The song's quirky music video, featuring the band rebelling against a stern schoolmaster, was clever enough to earn significant airplay on MTV's Headbangers Ball, exposing millions of viewers to a style of metal they had likely never heard before. For many American fans, I Want Out was their first taste of the entire European power metal scene. Despite the song's success, Halloween remained a largely underground phenomenon in the United States. Internal turmoil led to the departure of guitarist and main songwriter Kai Hansen shortly after the album's release, a massive blow from which the band struggled to recover for years. They were simply too European, too melodic, and perhaps too happy-sounding for a U.S. market that was leaning towards either grittier thrash or slicker glam. Did you know that I Want Out has been covered by numerous bands, including Sonata Arctica, Hammerfall, and Gamma Ray, the latter being the band Kai Hansen formed after leaving Halloween? The song's influence is immense. serving as a veritable cornerstone for the entire power metal genre it helped to create. From the founders of German power metal, we now turn to the heart of the Hollywood Strip for a band that was the living embodiment of glam excess, with one fiery anthem that defined their short-lived career. 11. Pretty Boy Floyd. By 1989, the glam metal scene on the Sunset Strip had reached its zenith of absurdity and flamboyance. And no band encapsulated that moment better than Pretty Boy Floyd. With their exaggerated makeup, mountains of teased hair, and over-the-top leather and lace outfits, they looked less like a band and more like an animated cartoon of the glam ideal. Their debut album was fittingly titled Leather Boys with Electric Toys, and their signature song was The Explosive Rock and Roll Is Gonna Set the Night on Fire. The song was a simple three-chord glam punk stomp, an unapologetic ode to the rock and roll lifestyle. The chorus was pure shout-along fun, and the music video was a spectacle of pyrotechnics, spinning guitars, and enough hairspray to burn a hole in the ozone layer. The song and the album were a moderate success, earning them a devoted fan base who embraced their over-the-top image. They were the ultimate party band for the end of the party. Like Trickster, however, Pretty Boy Floyd was a victim of timing. Their unabashedly glam image and sound became an instant target for ridicule when the grunge scene exploded. They were the poster children for the exact style of music that the new wave of rock was rebelling against. They quickly lost their record deal and faded from the mainstream spotlight. Fascinatingly, the band has continued in various forms for decades, becoming cult legends of the glam scene. They represent the absolute, unapologetic peak of the Sunset Strip ethos, a perfect, glittering snapshot of a moment in time when too much was never enough. Our next band also had a brief moment in the spotlight, but they came from a much grittier, more streetwise place, fronted by a charismatic woman who brought a dose of punk rock attitude to the metal scene. 12. Smashed Gladys. While the 80s rock scene was dominated by male bands, there were several incredible female-fronted acts fighting for their place in the spotlight. Hailing from New York City, Smashed Gladys brought a raw, gritty, punk-infused energy that stood in stark contrast to the polished sheen of many LA bands. Fronted by the magnetic Sally Cato, their sound was a dirty, swaggering rock and roll, closer to the New York Dolls than to Poison. Their one brush with mainstream attention came with the song Lick It Into Shape from their 1988 album Social Intercourse. The song was a sleazy, groovy rocker with a tough anthemic chorus. The video captured the band's gritty, street-level aesthetic and garnered some late-night airplay on MTV. Sally Cato was a phenomenal frontwoman, exuding confidence and a rock star charisma that was undeniable. The band had the songs and the attitude to be a major force, offering a more dangerous and authentic alternative to the more cartoonish end of the glam spectrum. But despite critical acclaim and a solid fan base, they never broke through. Their sound was perhaps too raw for a mainstream audience that was being fed a diet of highly polished pop metal. They were a band without a scene, too metal for the punk crowd and too punk for the metal crowd. They disbanded in the early 90s, leaving behind one crazy album that has since become a cult classic. Interestingly, the band's name was inspired by a character from a 1940s radio show, a fittingly obscure origin for a band that remains one of the decade's best-kept secrets. While Smashed Gladys deserved more, our next entry was a band that critics adored and tipped for stardom, but whose buzz was extinguished by the cruel winds of industry change. 13. Vane. In the crowded scene of the late 80s, it took something special to stand out. Vane from San Francisco had that special something. Led by the unique and captivating frontman Davey Vane, their 1989 debut album, No Respect, was a critical darling. Their sound was a darker, moodier, and more sophisticated take on hard rock, blending the swagger of the Rolling Stones with the gothic undertones of The Cult. Their signature track was the hard-driving Beat the Bullet. The song was a sleazy, powerful rocker with a memorable riff and an explosive chorus. The music video was in regular rotation on Headbangers Ball, and there was a massive industry buzz that Vane was going to be the next big thing. They had a unique sound, a mesmerizing frontman, and the critical acclaim to back it up. They seemed destined to break away from the glam metal pack and forge their own path to stardom. However, the road to hell is paved with good reviews. The band recorded a second album, but in the time it took to get it ready, their record label underwent a corporate merger, and the new regime dropped them without releasing it. It was a catastrophic blow that eliminated all their momentum. By the time they were able to release new music independently, the musical landscape had completely shifted. They were a band that did everything right, only to be undone by a corporate decision completely out of their control. Davey Vane went on to become a respected producer, but the lost potential of his band remains a tragic what-if for those who recognize their brilliance. From a band undone by label politics, we turn to one of the most famous one-hit wonders of all time, a song so ubiquitous that it completely defined and overshadowed the band that created it. 14. Autograph, Turn Up the Radio, I Need the Music, Gimme Some More. In 1984, that synth hook and explosive chorus were inescapable. Autograph's Turn Up the Radio is arguably the quintessential pop metal one-hit wonder. It's a perfect slice of 80s rock, blending a futuristic synthesizer riff with a driving guitar, a massive chorus, and a feel-good party-all-night vibe. The song was an absolute monster, climbing to number 29 on the Billboard Hot 100 and becoming a permanent fixture on MTV. The band's story is one of pure luck. They were friends with and often opened for Van Halen, and it was David Lee Roth who encouraged record labels to check them out. The song Turn Up the Radio was a last-minute addition to their debut album, Sign In Please, a track they didn't even think was that special. It was that song, however, that made them stars overnight. They were touring the world, their album went gold, and they were living the dream. The problem was, the hit was a fluke of pop metal perfection that proved impossible to replicate. Their subsequent albums, while containing solid rock songs, lacked that one magical ingredient that made Turn Up the Radio a crossover smash. The public only wanted to hear that one song, and the band was soon tagged with the one-hit wonder label from which they could never escape. They disbanded in 1989. The most interesting tidbit? The song has had a massive life in pop culture, famously appearing in an episode of Miami Vice and the video game Grand Theft Auto: Vice City Stories, cementing its status as an iconic piece of 80s nostalgia, far outliving the band that performed it. And now, we come to number 1. While Autograph stumbled into a hit, our final band was a true supergroup, featuring an iconic guitarist who crafted one of the most beloved anthems of the decade, a song that was both a blessing and a curse. 15. Europe. In 1986, that fanfare belonged to the final countdown. For the Swedish rock band Europe, this song was a global, culture-defining mega hit.